Well, Emma Kenny is a TV psychologist. She's been a brilliant voice through all of this. Whether you agree or disagree with her, you cannot fault that she's coming from a place of integrity and passion, I think, on this. And I can see her now. God, I don't like seeing you in vision when I'm saying lovely things about you, Emma. She joins me live via video link. How are you, Emma? Firstly,
I mean, I'm okay. I'm really exhausted. A lot of people are exhausted, and as you know, I spend a lot of my time trying to help people who feel very marginalised by this whole experience. So I'm not at all happy with the way that things are going, because a lot of us now have just taken a lot of time to read the data and really engross ourselves with the understanding of what we're seeing. And it really doesn't help when I know what the data says and then what the actions are. They don't marry each other.
So what are your concerns around the data? Because we've explored on this programme things like, for instance, the unreliability of the PCR test,
right,
and the fact that it might show an incidence of the virus in your bloodstream, but it won't show whether you're actually remotely infectious,
right,
which is obviously a big concern, because if you're taking data based on PCR tests on deaths or infections, and that's not reliable, obviously there's a big question mark there. Is there any other aspects of the data that has worried you?
I mean, I think I always look to the experts in that respect, but I think that one of the most important things is to look at, and this sounds really awful, but it comes down more to body count. And I hate having to say that, but I suppose that for a more lay person like myself, even though I'm working with epidemiologists, I'm working with sociologists, because that's really important as well. I think it's an area that we don't talk about a lot. Sociologists understand pandemics very well. But just to put it into context today, you know, the excess winter mortality this year overall looks like the same as it was in 2017. But the only thing that you can say when you look at that data is that it's very odd. In certain areas we'd expect it to be. So whilst the actual count is similar, what you're getting is a massive drop in illnesses that we would have expected to see.
But is that not due to the social distancing and restrictions, and
no,
therefore the excess deaths are the COVID ones, and we're seeing lower deaths in other illnesses that are being mitigated by the measures being brought in, meaning that actually that's why the COVID deaths are more serious? Or,
no,
because
you never get a drop in cancer and heart disease and strokes and aneurysms, unfortunately.
Okay, so it's not infectious stuff you're talking about, it's those other things.
Yeah, it's unfortunately what you'd get, obviously, with the respiratory illness, understandably, you would expect at this moment, because they've put flu and pneumonia in the same category as COVID, you would expect that there would be obviously a rise there. But you wouldn't then expect to drop anywhere else, because it just doesn't work that way. People don't suddenly get cured of cancer in this year. And I don't feel that anybody out there feels that we're really being told how we should be being informed. And listen, I don't want to blame anyone. The time for blame is over. What we know is that we've got people who are now mentally very unwell. That's something that I think I'm almost at that point where I don't care. If you think lockdowns are the best things to slice bread, well, I think you probably can afford to. If I'm really honest, I think you can afford to, and that's okay. I'm not angry with you. I understand it. Work-life balance in the UK has been pretty shoddy for a long time. And if you've had, a year off nearly, or have nearly a year off to come, I don't blame you for maybe not thinking outside of that box, because I've worked with lots of ill people who are stressed through work, right? So I'm not going to blame those people. But we have 3 million people who've received no financial aid. We have 14 million people in abject poverty who are poorer now.
350,000 now redundant from the first lockdown.
Thank you. And 850,000 expected. And the thing about human beings are, like when we think about mental health, listen, a lot of us catastrophize. A lot of us have these anxiety responses where it's all about my job to bring you back to a rational position and say, we often think that things will go catastrophically wrong, and really they don't. And I can do a lot of work around that with people. Unfortunately, and I say this with truth and integrity, I am disgusted by people in my position who have worked for the government to traumatise you. Because no matter whether you are somebody who has not had the benefit of being able to stay in home and be safe in that way, you've had to go to work as a frontline worker in a supermarket or a delivery driver, you haven't had an option there, but you still had the vicarious trauma. You've watched your children regress I've never seen as many children regressing. You've watched your teenagers go through distressing mental health issues. And on top of that, for some of you, you're losing your homes. So at this point in time, those arguments that I think we're all having, and I see it as you do, and I know you do, you're a bit like me. You want to see both sides, but I'm afraid what I'm erring on now is what I see in data. The data says this is the biggest overreaction we've ever had, but the biggest underreaction we've ever seen towards mental health, wellness, education and children, and furthermore, the future. So I think for me, it's bringing it back to that, okay, what can we control right now?
The thing that haunts me, Emma, and then the thought, and I've spoken to you about this before, that comes back to me every time, is not the death toll. I get the death toll. It's the idea of those people like me who are perhaps overweight, who would be considered medium vulnerability, who might require hospital treatment if I were to contract COVID. And that is the whole protect the NHS thing, isn't it? It's the whole, we've got to keep the level of the NHS low enough by suppressing people's contact because of those who are medium vulnerability. Do you now, with hindsight, as I do, look back and think actually there might have been a different way we could have done this that would have respected the medium vulnerability, respected people that might have needed hospital treatment and not died, and the strain that would have put on the NHS, without going as far as we did? For instance, I put forward the idea tonight that maybe what we should have done was, rather than have these sort of halfway house tiers which haven't even worked but have destroyed businesses, that perhaps we should have done regular 17-day circuit breaks with them in the diary. So businesses knew they were coming. People who were socialising knew that they were coming. People in care homes knew that they were coming. Those were the times we locked down. The rest of the time we went about our lives normally and tried to claw back some of what we've lost. Is that an idea, or how else would your hindsight have perhaps dealt with it?
You know, I'm the first person to say I'm not an expert in that area. So what I've done is I've spent months now talking to them. So I'll take a public health expert who runs sub-Saharan Africa vaccine programs, the most pro-vaccine person you could ever meet in your life. And he said, apart from it being a catastrophic overreaction, that very early on we could look at South Africa and see that very few people were dying there because only 0.8% of the population are over 80. And also, most probably because of, as you said, the leanness and lack of comorbidities in comparison. So early on, we knew what we needed to do. The question is, why didn't we do that? I don't think circuit breakers, in my opinion, and looking and listening to people who are talking about this now, would have been effective. Sweden examples that it can be done, that you obviously initially may have an issue with a spike in deaths, but then they level out. But we live in a different country.
And Sweden are suffering quite badly now, aren't they?
There's different ways. To be honest, if you look at the way that it's portrayed in the media versus what you actually see in the data, let me be honest, it's a different conversation. But what I would say is I agree with you. We locked down too late. We didn't do what New Zealand did. So once we
kept the borders
open, it
open.
was too late. Right.
We kept the borders open. We had 50,000 people coming in from high COVID countries while closing down the rest of the country. We've been playing catch up ever since.
Right. I think what the big one for me is, if what you said would have worked, then when we did Eat Out to Help Out, and we did it in droves, and it was flipping popular, there wasn't a spike in hospitals. There wasn't an overwhelming issue with the NHS. In that moment, we had a perfect opportunity to explore really what was happening. And I think you're right. Listen, I don't feel that anyone who's scared should be made to go and be anywhere that they don't want to be. But what I can tell you is the people I'm talking to, they're not scared mostly. They're very scared of what's happening next mentally and physically. If you felt that you were a person at risk, I think we could have happily paid you to be at home safe if you wanted that, and well as well, so paid well. So everybody else could get the economy going, because we know the catastrophe that's coming next. And the problem is, and this is a very clear problem, when you dare to say, well, I would have liked to have given targeted shielding to those who wish for it to happen, you're called a murderer. And let us make no doubts about that, Cristo. Online, that's it. Online, you get cancelled for saying that.
Oh, I agree with that.
You do.
But Emma, this is the issue, and this gets to the heart of it. And again, this is what worries me. Those people of medium vulnerability who are overweight like myself, or obese actually, they could be somewhere in the region of 15 million people here in the UK. And that's my big concern, is how would we have been able to say to them, you guys shield, because it's so many millions of people,
but they haven't wanted
been away?
to, and under 70, even with comorbidities, your chance of surviving is massive.
But you might still need hospital treatment, you see, and then doesn't that get us back to the NHS issue?
Well, no, because that's what the NHS is there for. And the idea that we've tagged this idea, and I'm sorry, what I find quite reprehensible is that we're telling people to protect the NHS. I haven't paid my taxes for that. I haven't paid my taxes so a 10-year-old boy can die of brain cancer because he was refused treatment, or the mother of 4 that died in my area, that father that I talked to, because she was refused treatment. I don't think that the whole point is our job.
So the whole point of us doing what we're doing is so that people like that you've just described get their treatment. That's the whole point.
They didn't.
That's the whole point.
If you think, you think about this, right? And again, I don't want to come down on any doctors and nurses, right? I don't. I think that one of the big problems is we do have doctors and nurses who are traumatised because they were redeployed to ICU. They weren't prepared for it. I work in trauma. It's horrible for some people. For me, I manage it. If you're in the wrong place, it doesn't work for you. But it was never overwhelmed. That's the key. It was never overwhelmed. 3 weeks we were meant to deal with it. Then it was quiet all the way through summer. Then we've gone back into lockdown saying, it might get overwhelmed. Well, you know what? In that quote, might get overwhelmed, children have killed themselves. Fathers have died of cancer. Parents have died of strokes. Babies have been stillborn, and believe me, the raising babies being stillborn is catastrophic.
Yeah.
And that's before we talk about next year and the year after and the year after. So actually, for me and from a mental health perspective, and it's not just me now, and I'm glad to say that there are a lot of medics starting to come out, we do not protect the NHS. The NHS protects us. And if it does not, then what is the NHS meant to be there for? How long do we carry on with the data that says that you are over 99 and at times in certain statistic groups 99.9% certain to get well, 99.7% on the whole to get well, and even if you're 95 years old with comorbidities, you're still about 95% at times we're going to get well. What? Come on. I tell you what the difference is. If you get cancer and you have no treatment, you're 100% going to die. And what's really upsetting for me at the moment is I've never seen regression in children like I've watched now. I've never seen children going to classrooms, being educated in the cold, being made to eat their meals with their fingers because they're not allowed to touch knives and forks, having Christmas crackers but only if they pull them themselves. We are touting lies. And the problem for me is that when we start to gaslight and coercively control the nation, and believe me, I've worked with men and women who coercively control, and I know it. They make you reason with unreasonable. They confuse you. They constantly make you feel afraid that maybe you'll do something wrong and maybe you'll be judged for that. And in the end of it, you'll be at a point where you'll be that stunned about what the next decision to make is, you back off and think, I better just be quiet and let them just tell me what to do.
God, Emma, it's just like you've described my thought process today. And every time I think that I know where I am and
my job is
oh God, it's.
Do you know what? Do you know what? Welcome to Sage, because Sage have paid what I consider mean psychologists to gaslight you so that you reason with unreasonable. And the problem is, as much as you reason with unreasonable, I'll change your boundaries and I'll make you reason with that unreasonable. And in the end, you'll be so confused that you'll just be helpless. And the other side of it before, I know you've got loads of people to talk to, but think of this. If I want to create the biggest division, I will make one part of the community feel safe enough with my government. I'll say, you are paid furlough. And believe me, I don't want anybody starving. I don't. I want those people paid. I will pay all these public service workers furlough, 80% of your wages. You'll be richer. You'll probably be able to break a few rules and not let people know. But you can quietly just enjoy that because you don't need to think about anybody else. And I don't judge you for that. I understand it. However, I've now got your support. I must be a good government. I must be a caring government. Therefore, what I say makes sense. But you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to take millions of you and I'm going to starve you. and I'm going to make you so ill, and I'm going to make you so scared, and I'm going to starve your children. I'm going to take everything that made sense to you, because I'm going to steal every bit of your business, your creativity, your opportunity, your safety. And I'm going to make you so helpless that you'll do anything I tell you to do. And you know what? People can try to tell me, and I get it all the time, as you know, that I'm wrong, but I've just evidenced what's happening in the UK.
All right, well, but then how would you put, because there are certain virologists in this who I don't feel like have skin in the game. I don't feel like they're trying to push an agenda. One of them is a gentleman called Barrett Pankania, who we've spoken to on this programme a couple of times. And what I like about him is that he'll call out the government being wrong. He'll call out when he thinks a decision has been right. I don't feel like he's towing any particular line. Whereas his big concern, though, and he has a genuine concern as a clinical virologist and a lecturer on that with Christmas, what happened in the States, where people all mingled together for Thanksgiving, what we're now seeing 2.5 weeks later is many deaths in the States because of the fact that people mingled. And obviously that's having an effect here with what people are thinking about Christmas. Now, what would you say to someone like that, who seems to be coming from a good place, who's genuinely worried about what he's seeing could possibly happen? How would you counteract those concerns?
You know, absolutely right. I'm not a doctor.
No,
I'm not, and I always say that because you'll have 100 people go, Emma Kenny's not, and I know it. I haven't suddenly qualified.
Yeah, I know you're not sort of putting yourself in a position.
I don't want to be glib about it and pretend that I know more. But what I'd say is that January and February have a peak in respiratory deaths. Also, you're right. America have people who are very obese, more so of a problem actually than in the UK. You refer to yourself the way that you refer to yourself, but you're incomparable to the, let's say, highly over the 75th quartile in many ways. So as much as you think you have a problem, we have people with much bigger problems, and I mean that both weight-wise and it's not their fault, because it's the rubbish we put in the food. Because the government doesn't care for you. They don't care about what's in your food, but that's another thing.
Oh yeah, they keep us fat and then
like
try
you being fat. Yeah. They like you being helpless. That's another thing.
That I believe.
But let's be honest. When we look at the average age, and let's be really honest, when we look at the average age of a COVID death in the UK, we have to say it's 82.4. That means it's 1.4 years older than the average death in the UK, and it's 10 years older than a death in poverty. But let me also say this: people who die of COVID, on the whole, there will always be an exception. Let me tell you, I would never say it's never the case, because bet your bottom dollar there'll always be an exception to the case. Like there is a child who runs down the road and has a heart attack. There is a 21-year-old who has an aneurysm. Always an exception to the case. But for the most part, if you get together with your loved ones at Christmas and you happen to have a very old, very vulnerable, very sick person that's going to die within a few months, there is a small chance you may kill them a few months earlier, and I agree with that. But let me tell you, I would rather die in the arms of my loved ones, surrounded by people I grew with, knowing that I will not live in a sanitised ward alone with strangers at a time of my need. If you ask me to have that choice over the month that you're going to give me otherwise, then damn straight I'll have that Christmas.
Because this is I know we've got to finish, but this is just the dilemma that I'm in at the moment, in as much as I thought I was doing the right thing. I really did. And honestly, I hate being this woolly. I hate being this person, actually, that's sort of being pulled one way, being pulled the other. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I going to kill my mother by going to...
You shouldn't judge yourself. I don't want... This is the thing, you see. I am very hardline because I'm watching old people in care homes terrorised, traumatised and tortured, not by the caregivers, just by the separation. I'm watching it. We all know that. But actually, people like you have a moral compass, and you spent nearly a year being gaslit. That's it. You've been coercively controlled to such a toxic degree that an intelligent human being who just wants to see the people that love him and who can be surrounded by love within that, feels but I get
it.
Wrong.
This is what's frustrating, is I also get it. I get what you're saying. You and I have agreed before, and then I end up getting pulled back to this idea that...
Okay, let me tell you this, right? I was on TV
Yeah.
with this Public Health England, and let me tell you this, it blows my mind, because the thing about me is no matter what people can say, you can take me apart, but you won't find fault with what I'm saying, because I'm not stupid, and I check out the data and I do the research. I've been spending all night tonight with the research. But the Public Health England woman said, when I suggested that social isolation was more dangerous than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, she called me a liar. I got every single one of those empirical studies, even including the ones by the NHS up. So let me tell you, if you want to be a healthy human being, if you really want to live a long life, we have two key themes. One, spend time with close social bonds. Two, spend time with close interactions in micro expressions with human beings that you meet on a regular basis. So there are two things. You're meant to smile at people in the street and have a quick conversation, and you're meant to spend a lot of time with people that you love. It hires immunity, it lowers stress, it increases well-being. And what we're doing now, look at our lives.
Yeah.
Have we ever felt so unhappy? And if you can tell me that unhappiness is better for you than being surrounded by love at a risk of 99.7% for surviving, well, I know which one I'm going to go for.
Yeah, I think you've put a very compelling case. And what's frustrating is that you know, I thought I was doing it all the right way. I booked a hotel down the road, so we weren't staying together, and we were just going to have lunch and sit there in a distance way and do all the things you're supposed to do. And now I feel even guilty about that. I am in the most privileged. Let me just say, Emma, I know I'm in the most privileged position. I'm able to still work every night. I'm able to actually afford a hotel so that I don't have to stay in the house.
But you're also going to Tesco, right? Let's just put this into context for people who are struggling with this. All these people having these major philosophical conversations about what they're meant to do. I don't see them struggling when they go to the supermarket and are served by an amazing person behind the till who might be overweight, who doesn't look like they're scared, who isn't afraid, who constantly gives you what you need and isn't asking for any special attention, right? That's because they've exposed themselves to the reality. Look, people die. They're going to die. And you know what? This is a really big message for people out there. You're all going to die. She's a serial killer. Mother Nature's been doing it a while. And I'm not glib. I'm honestly having that conversation, because what I think I've found more than anything is if COVID has done one thing, for the first time in a long time, the whole UK is united over a belief system. And maybe what we need to do is take a step back and think, maybe it's not COVID we need to believe in. Maybe it's what we've lost about our communities and our connections, and what we as a community can do to bring back the spirit of connection. Because without it, there is no humanity.
All right, Emma, really good to talk to you as always. Really, really amazing. And I know you come from such a place of integrity, and I know how worried you are by what's happening and how worried you are for everyone. And I really thank you for taking the time. That's the TV psychologist and writer. Does what Emma says really resonate with you? If so, then why don't you call and tell me? Are you yourself, like me, now in something of a bind about what the best thing is to do? We'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this more here on Talk Radio.